most of those facts actually are not accurate anymore, and so that should change your judgment. So I'm always reticent to make a rash judgment and say, well, let's see what happens. Like even when there's these famous trials, people will be like, oh yeah, I know he's guilty, or I know they're not guilty, whatever. Well, the trial hasn't even started yet, so let's just see what evidence is presented, and then we can get to that word, or those two words, exact truth. Because right now, you don't know what it is, I don't know what it is. We're going to have to wait to find out, what it is.
Hi, and welcome to 5 Random Questions, the show where every question is an adventure. I'm your host, Danny Brown, and each week I'll be asking my guests 5 questions created by a random question generator. The guest has no idea what the questions are, and neither do I, which means this could go either way. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into this week's episode. But before we do that, I want to give a quick shout out and thanks to Bob Ledoux in Canada, who left a really nice review for the show on Apple Podcasts, saying you might think the format would lead to disjointed interviews, but Danny's skill as a host and friendly style means the conversations are free-flowing, honest, and centred on humanity. So thanks so much, Bob, I appreciate you. If you enjoy the show and want to leave a review, you can do that over at 5randomquestions.com/review, and I'll give you a shout out just like this one. Now to this week's guest. Today's guest is Frank Racioppi. After 38 years as a speechwriter and editor for a Fortune 500 company, he retired and indulged his love of podcasting by creating 4 podcast blogs, which included the popular online publication Earworthy that Frank started in 2017 and helps indie podcasters by reviewing and featuring their shows. In the 80s, he wrote for print magazines like American Health, New Jersey Monthly, and more. He's published 5 novels and 4 nonfiction books in the last 4 years, with his most popular nonfiction book sharing his 18 days in quarantine at the COVID hotel at the end of 2021, start of 2022. So Frank, welcome to 5 Random Questions.
Danny, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And at the risk of Apple polishing the host, that was a great review by the gentleman.
That was a lovely review. And in fairness, I know Bob. I've known him for a little while. Being in Canada, we kind of bump into each other at events. But yeah, he's like a really nice guy, much like yourself, that's very supportive of podcasts and shows that he listens to. So yeah, that was really nice of him.
All right. Well, great. I'm a little nervous about the questions because, most interviews, you prepare for the questions. Now it's like without a net.
I'll promise to be gentle with you, but hey, I don't know the questions either, so that's a little bit of like sharing the load, if you like. If the load was 95% you and 4% me and 1% whoever else wanted to take the blame. I do have to ask you a couple of quick things though before we jump into the main questions themselves. I'd mentioned there you've written 9 books in just 4 years. So what's your typing speed?
It's not as fast as it sounds like it would be. It's about 40 words a minute. But after I end up typing, I spend more time going back and actually re-editing than I do the actual typing. So I learned that the hard way. And then luckily, as a writer, writing's pretty solitary, but I have a team of people. So I have a copy editor. I have a grammar editor, besides Grammarly, the program, and then I have what's called a beta reader, and that person, reads every chapter. So I've got people, and they'll come back and make changes, and then I'll go back and edit. So my typing speed isn't fast, but then again, even for people who type 90 words a minute, you still have to go back, and good writing's about good editing.
I mean, it's just when you mention like 9 books and 4, especially with fiction, I feel like non-fiction. Well, I'm not sure. What's your preference? Is it fiction or non-fiction from a writing point of view?
I would say now fiction. The last several books I've done have been novels. I started off with 1, 2, 3 non-fiction books, but have transitioned into fiction, and I'm starting to enjoy that. Before I worked for the same company for 30 some odd years, I was a magazine writer when print was big back in the 80s. That's how old I am. And that was enjoyable. And that was all nonfiction. As a matter of fact, if I can tell you a really quick story about that, if you don't mind. So I did an article for a magazine called American Fitness. And the article was about bone density. So it was a pretty scientific article. I had done a lot of research. It was a long article, and I think it was about 3,000 words. Anyway, they paid you 10 cents back then for a word. So I got like $300. And then I got a call from the photographer the magazine hired to take a picture for the article. So he was just trying to get an idea of, what I was looking for. And I was like, hey, you're the expert. So he sent me a copy of the photo, and I talked to him and I said, oh, that was great. I really appreciate it. He said, yeah, he said, I got to tell you, photography is really, it's really profitable for me, this freelance photography. I made $7,000 for the photo. Oh. And I paused for a second. I said, wait, what? I made $300 and you made $7,000? He said, yeah, I'm sorry about that, but that's just the way it goes.
Now then, did you continue writing for that magazine, or did you at least try to renegotiate your rates or the rates that they were paying you?
I tried to do that, and they basically, their response to that was, let's see, take it or leave it. So I continued to do a few more articles for them and work with the same photographer, and I was actually happy for him that he was making good money. We worked well together, so.
It always seems, I've got a few writer friends, and it always seems that writers are viewed as the least valuable at times when it comes to, contributions and what they get paid. I know now it seems better, like a lot of publications will pay, say, $1 per word. So at least if you've got the high word count, you're doing all that research, you'll get paid properly for your time. But there's still ones that just want to, skim as much as they can off the writer for some reason.
Sure. And of course, nowadays, because of the internet over the last 25 years, most writing is free. So there's all those print magazines are all gone. So access to that avenue for freelance writing is gone. So you really have to generate any revenue through writing, just like doing a podcast review, through a publication in which pays you for reads and impressions. And that's usually how I'll work, is that I'll work for publications where I'll get paid either way.
Right. And that's a good thing. I mean, how are you finding Substack? I know you're on Substack, but you're also on Medium, and you're on, Blogger, etc. How are you finding the different ones when it comes to potential premium subscribers and payments, anything like that?
I mean, it's all pretty modest. There's some people on Substack, and I have to say, I'm a fan of both Medium and Substack. But there's people on Substack that have done a far better job than I have of monetizing their Substack, and they'll have thousands of paid subscribers, and I'm at a small part of that. So there is potential there, and I do recognize that it's up to me to go out and sort of unleash that potential in order to get those subscribers, and of course, I mean, quite frankly, get that revenue. But it is there, and Medium, the same thing. I know a few people that write articles, and they'll get. You get paid, as you'll get paid per read and impression. So a read on Medium, somebody will correct me, I think is 30 seconds or more. An impression is 30 seconds or less. And anyway, there's some people get 50,000 reads or impressions, and so you could make some money like that.
Well, unfortunately, while I can't pay you for appearing today, I do value, little tenuous link there, I do value you appearing on the show and putting yourself up to what we have for 5 random questions. So you're ready to throw down yourself to the gauntlet?
I am ready as I ever will be.
Okay, let's bring up the 5 random questions and see what we have this week. Question number 1. And remember, this is a PG show, so be careful here. What part of your body could use a little lotion?
Oh, well, actually, and you may not believe this, I love this question. Because for me, this is fairly easy. Being the age that I'm at, and I see this in other people, the area that needs lotion all the time is the elbows. Both elbows. Not that I make a practice of looking at that, but if you look at people who are like myself up there in age, one of the ways that your age can portray you is your elbows. So I always... my partner, Linda, is always like, put lotion on your elbows and knees today. Knees as well. That's 2 areas that dry out quite a bit. So there's maybe more. You may not want to know that much about lotion and my daily lotion practices, but it's definitely elbows first, than knees, especially in the summer now because you're always wearing shorts. So, yeah, definitely.
Well, the elbows are such a weird part of skin. You know, if you look at them, there's like this flappy bit of skin that basically does nothing. I guess, okay, if you bend your arms, it makes sure that your elbow bone doesn't stick out and pop out your skin because it stretches, but it's such a weird part. But I can see why you'd want to, you know, lotion up your elbows. I was going to say grease up, and that didn't sound right at all. But lotion up your elbows. Do you think that's because obviously the elbows got a lot more use as well? You're leaning them on chairs and desks and stuff. You're leaning them if you're traveling on a train or a jet and you're against a window or anything like that? Or is it just the fact that because it's such a weird skin, it gets more wrinkly quicker?
Yeah. Well, I think the elbow is different for a couple of reasons. So for example, if you have your arms hanging down loose, so then your elbow has that extra skin. But if you tense your arm in any way, it makes the skin taut. So that looseness disappears. So it sort of depends on what you're doing. So if you want to get rid of the looseness on your skin with your elbows, try to walk like Arnold Schwarzenegger with your arms kind of tilted where you've just worked out and lifted 400 pounds, and it'll get rid of that elbow sag.
I can almost picture or letting it shows listeners doing that exercise as listening. You know, if they're in the gym, for example, where they're doing groceries or walking, you know, in the park or something. I mean, I was just doing it now. Obviously, this is an audio-only show, so you won't see this if you're listening to this episode. But I was like doing straightening my arm as Frank was speaking and, you know, bringing it back up and just seeing the effect of that elbow skin. So yeah, it's weird how, like, I used to use lotion a lot when I was younger. And I don't as much now that I'm older, and I really should. But it's weird how a lot of people still don't, and men in particular actually, don't see using lotion as a valuable, you know, exercise. How do you feel about that? Is that something that you feel we should do more?
Oh, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I was going to give credit to a podcast, Ariel and Ned's Daily Tips that may or may not help you. They had a tip on last year, right when they started, that said that. So I'll back up for a second. Usually when I put lotion on, and I think it is important to do that, I would do it, take a shower, get out, and then kind of towel off and then do it in a couple minutes. But according to them, and then I kind of researched this, as soon as you take a shower, when you're still wet, you should throw the lotion on right away, and it kind of seeps into your skin. So I'm a little shaky on scientific ground there. I don't remember all the podcasts, but so I started doing that, and I think it helps. So get a shower or a bath and then put the lotion on right away. And I'm not afraid as a man to say that, although I guess some people may be.
No, and that's a great show as well. I listen to that a lot. And I'll leave a link to that podcast in the show notes so you can check out for yourself. But yeah, it's an awesome show. But I guess that's similar to being at the beach or whatever, where you're putting sunscreen lotion on. And a lot of people do it after they've come out. So they put it on before they go in for a swim in the lake, for example. And they wait till it dries, and then they go in the lake, then they come out and put it on while they're still wet as a top-up. So I guess that ties into that a little bit, maybe.
Oh, yeah. Before people really had a sense how the sun was bad for you, I'm not sure if you witnessed this, but I remember as a teenager, especially women would come onto the beach and then just slather themselves with baby oil. Because that would enhance the whole tanning process. Now, I don't think anybody does that now because they realize that's pretty bad for your skin. But that was something that was fairly common. That and those aluminum boards that they would hold under their face. Yeah. It's amazing how things have changed.
Yeah, thankfully. I mean, our kids love we're fortunate where we are. We have a lake about a 10, maybe 50-minute walk from our house. And so our kids go up there all the time, and they know, you know, get protection and make sure you're good to go. But so there you go. If you're looking to make sure that your elbow is looked after, that's the first place you should lotion up. You heard it from Frank.
And there's no copay for that. That's a freebie.
There you go. Even better. Okay, so let's have a look at what question number 2 holds for us. All right, Frank. Question number 2. When scrolling through social media, do you prefer posts from celebrities or from your best friends?
Ah, boy, another good question. Well, I'm going to start by saying, Danny, that I have a confession to make.
I've got another confession to make.
I canceled my Facebook account like 4 years ago. And a couple of reasons I did that is one is I kept getting hacked and someone was constantly stealing my account. I never thought that Facebook was that great at security. Not sure what other people think. And then it got taken over by a Russian or Chinese bot. I'm not sure what or which. And that was a 2-month process of trying to get that finally canceled. And so I deleted my account, never started it back up again. So that's the one social media outlet I don't have. So having said all that, my answer is I prefer posts from celebrities rather than friends. And does that surprise you, by the way?
Oh, no, I mean, because I feel that with your publications and with what you do online, it seems that you're more geared towards others outside your circle and helping them and being involved with them. And maybe you keep your friends for offline more. I don't know if that's maybe right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think the other part of that is somehow I think my partner Linda still has a Facebook account, and I'm not sure how big a trend this is, but a lot of people on Facebook post things of their activities where I question, do people really need to know that? We have a friend who, every time they go out for dinner, posts that they're at this restaurant and take pictures of what they're eating. And so I'm happy that they're having a great time and enjoying themselves, but I'm not sure if looking at their food at the restaurant is all that significant. So I would rather that's why and when you say celebrities, that's people like I consider you a celebrity. I mean, I'm a podcast fan, so people like Ariel Nissenblatt is a celebrity to me, so I'll look at that. Podcast movement's coming up. The Tribeca Audio Festival. To me, those are celebrities, so I'll check those things out. The Life Shift podcast, Matt Gilhooly, those are celebrities, so I want to see what they're doing.
No, thank you. And I did a little laugh there. I apologize. I didn't mean to be flippant when you said that. No. I appreciate that, mate. I do. And I hear what you say. I look at, when I used to blog a lot before I did podcasting, and I look at bloggers in the social media space and really look up to them, as you mentioned, as celebrities. Guys like Chris Brogan, for example, used to religiously read all his stuff and met him a couple of times at events and got a little starstruck in that. So I hear you. From that point of view then, so you mentioned it's more in the space, so that, like say, the podcasting space. Who would you like to sit down and have a quick bite with?
Well, the first person would be Mark from Captivate.
I can make that happen.
Probably James Cridlin from Pod News, Ariel Nissenblatt, Lauren Passell from Tink Media. They're all fascinating people. There's a woman who does a podcast who lives in Singapore. Her podcast is called Multispective. Her name is Janika Sadwani, and she does a podcast where people have gone through trauma and sort of come out on the top side of all that. She's fascinating. I would love to sit down and actually interview her. So here's the one thing about celebrity I always find is that although people think that celebrities are famous to everybody, it's really pretty contextual. And I'll give you not to go on too long, but I'll give you a good example of that. A couple of years ago, I was in Atlantic City. It's not far, like 50 minutes from our house. And I was just sitting down, getting something to eat, and reading. And 2 huge security guys come over to me and said, "Hey, you're not going to cause a problem because a celebrity's coming by." I'm like, "No, that's fine. Who's a celebrity?" And they said that he's some DJ on some reality show. Like, well, listen, first of all, I've never heard of him, so not really sure that I would care that if he went by, and I wouldn't even know him if I saw him. So to me, he's not a celebrity. They're like, "Oh, okay." He just went by. Then on the flip side of that, I went to a live recording in Atlantic City of the Slate Money podcast, and Felix Salmon is the host there. This is several years ago. Probably a lot of people listening to this don't know who he is, but people in podcasting, some people do. there was maybe 100 people there, it would be like he was Elvis. I mean, people just mobbed him. So sort of celebrities, contextual, it just sort of matters who, what group you're a celebrity in. I mean, some people like Taylor Swift, it doesn't matter the group. They're a celebrity for everybody. But for most people, it really is pretty situational.
I remember, not quite celebrity because it's a physical item as opposed to a person, but not long after I moved to Canada, I was at a pub with my friend. It was like a sports bar, and the owner of the sports bar was pretty well connected in the Canadian sports world. So there was a bunch of people taking pictures with this trophy. And he asked me, hey, do you want to get your picture taken? Yeah, sure, I'll get my picture taken. So I stood next to this trophy, got my picture taken. No idea what the trophy was. Sent it off to my wife who was at home. I sent a quick text with a picture. Said, hey, I got pictured with this trophy. What is it? Well, that's a Stanley Cup. Oh, okay. So all like the biggest cup in hockey, obviously, right? So yeah, like you say, it's very contextual and who and what or what you view as a celebrity, if you like.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And because I'm a huge podcast fan, but specifically an independent podcaster fan. So I would be more excited about meeting an independent podcaster than I would, say, like somebody well known, like a Joe Rogan or a Dak Shepard. I mean, they're well known. People know what they're about. I am more interested in the indie podcasters because their stories sort of untold. And on top of that, an indie, a network-supported podcaster, they have one job: to come in and do the show. As you know, being an independent podcaster or working with Captivate, you're doing everything. You're the IT person, you're the writer, you're the producer, you're the director, you're the editor, you're the sound person, marketing person. There's a lot of hats there. That person, to me, is a celebrity.
And that's a great way to put it. As you say, it's a lot of work. I think that's what sometimes puts people off podcasting after they've started and they realise how much work's involved. And that's why you see a lot of podcasters stop before episode 6 or before episode 7. So yeah, that's a great point regarding that. And to Frank's point, I can 100% concur. Support for indie podcasters is so important, and Frank does an amazing job of that. So I just wanted to give that shout out to you, mate.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Speaking of appreciation, I appreciate your answer there. Moving on, you can tell I have to sometimes tenuous little link there. So, but speaking of that, let's have a look at question number 3. Question 3, Frank. What is the stupidest thing you've done because someone dared you to?
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's a good one. All right, so Danny, this is going to be somewhat embarrassing. And it's a PG show, so I'll keep it as family friendly as possible. So I'm a big football fan, like a lot of people, and because although I live in South Jersey, I grew up in North Jersey, and I'm a big New York Giants football fan, and partially too because my company took me around to different states. So I've lived in Illinois, Connecticut, Georgia, lived in Atlanta for 11 years, California. So when you get to travel around, you take your team with you. So anyway, big Giants fan, and I think it was 2007, they play the Patriots, and that may be the year that the Patriots were undefeated at that point. I think it was 2007. Anyway, the Giants are huge underdogs in the Super Bowl. So we have a whole bunch of people around, and we had some Patriot fans there and Giant fans, and so because I have some family that's up in New England, were down for the game. So somebody said, and of course it was a few hours into the game, so we had some spirits liberally during the first three quarters into the fourth quarter, and someone said, do you think the Giants were losing towards the end of the game? They said, well, I'll tell you what, let's make a bet. I said, oh, okay. And he said, let's do the reverse bet. You're a Giant fan, so if the Giants win, you have to go out your front door and run down the street naked and come back, and vice versa. I said, okay, I'll take that bet. And of course, they end up winning the game, and had to do that. And so luckily it was dark out, and there was no one out and about. So That was quick. It was quick. It was a quick streak.
I was going to ask, you have a lot of kids in your neighborhood?
No, I wouldn't have done it then. I wouldn't have done it. It was pretty late at night, so it was fast. It's probably the fastest I've ever run.
And was this, so you mentioned this is 2007 you mentioned, yep, you think? 2007?
Yeah, I think so. I can.
Yeah, so this would have been pre-popular social media. So at least you wouldn't have had anyone like live streaming or filming you as you're going and, embarrassing you later in life and whatever.
Oh my God. That's one of the benefits, the pre-social media, is that you don't have those kinds of things. It always seems to be camera at the wrong time.
I would have hated to have had social media when I was a teen. I was like a teen back in the... I'm going to think similar to you, mate. I was a teen back in the 80s. I would not like to have... Some of the stuff that I did, Dan, I would not like to have appeared on, TikTok or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. At an adjunct to that, when I retired from my job, I'll come back to this in a second. I had this crazy idea that, so I was a writer and I have a teaching degree and I taught for my company for years. So I said, well, when I retire, I'm going to get a job that's totally different. Like work with your hands, not a job of where you're in charge of anything. So I found this job, which I really did like. So I became a school bus driver for a little while. And I did really enjoy that job. So one day I'm driving the school bus and I was high school. And there you can see in the back, and there was one of the students, female students, was flashing people as they went by. So there's a microphone, so I stopped the bus, got the microphone, and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Oh, well, they dared me to do that." So now this is after I had done the stupid Giants thing, and so I said to her, "I've done things like that before, and they're dumb. So just stop it right now, and we'll forget about all that." But dares are dangerous.
Well, and the interesting thing is as well, and I'm not sure who inspired who, whether you inspired Will or Will inspired you. The Old School movie. Will Ferrell's character is called Frank.
Oh, yeah.
He does
he runs naked, and doesn't he see his wife in a car as he's running by?
Running alongside it, yeah. So I feel there was some inspiration going on there from, I feel you're due some royalties from Will Ferrell. We'll have to get him to pay up there. So there you go. If you want to see Frank embarrassed now that we're in the age of social media, maybe take him to a football game, have some tipples, and let's do the reverse there. Hey there, Danny here. This podcast will forever be free to listen to. But if you enjoy 5 Random Questions and get value from the show and want to support it, you can either do that with a donation of your choosing or as a monthly supporter with a 5 Random Questions membership. Choose your preference over at 5randomquestions.com/support. And now, back to this week's episode. Speaking of dares, let's dare move on to question number 4. This is an interesting one, Frank. Question 4. Would you rather never be able to express yourself accurately or always have to say the exact truth?
This is a great question. And reminds me of what's that Jim Carrey movie where he's Liar, Liar. I love that. I absolutely love that movie. And this question sort of has the corona of the same concept there. So to try to be honest here, I don't think anybody can get through their entire day, and this is also part of the movie, without at least a couple white lies. I mean, we do that all the time. And sometimes we do that. Sometimes we don't tell the truth for what we consider to be admirable reasons. Hey, how do I look today? Oh, you look great. How'd I do? You did great. Wonderful job. You did good. And that may not exactly be the truth, but at what point here, what's the point of the negative feedback if it's not to teach? So I would say, gosh, that is really a tough one. I guess, not expressing yourself accurately, that's a tough one because especially as a writer, I mean, that's the key to that. Is you want to express yourself accurately, especially like if you're reviewing a podcast, you want to make sure that you're very, accurate and you're also explaining exactly how good the podcast is. So I would say, yeah, having to say the exact truth, especially since doing podcast reviews is really about the accuracy. And so I do 5 to 7 podcast reviews and recommendations during the week. And I got a comment from somebody saying, movie critics review movies and sometimes they'll really pan the movie and give it a terrible review. Why don't you ever do that with a podcast? And I wrote him back and said, I'm going to answer that, but first of all, I want to tell you that's an excellent question. It's a very good question. And I said, the answer to that, from my perspective, is this. There's about 120 movies that come out a year. You think 52 weeks out of the year, that's a couple movies a week, although, it's not that consistent. There's weeks where there's none, and then during the summer, there's like 5 all at once there. So there's not a lot out there. So if there's just one movie that comes out and you review it's not very good, that's fair. But as we talked about before the show, there's hundreds of thousands of podcasts, and there's thousands of really good ones. So why would I? So for people who are podcast fans, what they're looking for is that great podcast that they don't know is out there. It's there, you just can't find it. And I mean, as a reviewer, I found there where someone said, hey, listen to this podcast, this independent podcast, and it's from this person. Like, for example, I listened to this woman several years ago that has a sewing podcast. Now, I don't know anything about sewing, and she had a cute title for it called So What? But she was terrific on it. So for people who like sewing, I'm like, I don't know anything about sewing, but if you do, you need to listen to this podcast. And that's the idea with podcast discoverability. It's about, how do I find a podcast that I'm going to love about a topic I love? So, if I love Star Wars, there's plenty of them out there, but maybe I'm missing one. So that's the reason, I always want to try to find something to give people to listen to, not to listen to.
And that's a really good point. Like you say, it's easy for us as humans to criticize something. You see it online all the time. People, like they'll rage bait or they'll hate bait, so they'll be negative, and sometimes vitriol is out the roof because they just want clicks on their links to the blog posts or the YouTube videos or whatever. But it's not always that you get someone that just wants to, shine the light on people doing the good stuff, right? And I think that's like a key thing where, as you say, it really helps, especially indie podcasters. It really helps people find them because you're only going to be sharing the good stuff. So now people know, hey, if I want to find a podcast about X, I know Frank's honest. I know he'll only share stuff he enjoys and recommends. So I'm going to check out Frank, and I'm going to check out his recommendations. So I think that works both ways, and it's a good thing to see as well, right?
Absolutely. And as I think more about this question, the last word of the question is truth. And so I remember from years ago during the George W. Bush administration, he had a press secretary named Ari Fleischer. So he comes out, and I forget what the crisis was, but he comes out and the press asks him a lot of questions, and he says, first facts are often the most unreliable. And I really took that to heart and remember that word truth. Well, sometimes when we have these media crises where something happens, right away people have a rush to judgment. It happened because of this. It's that person's fault. They did this and they shouldn't have done it. And then we find out a couple of months later, well, most of those facts actually are not accurate anymore. And so that should change your judgment. So I'm always reticent to make a rash judgment and say, well, let's just see what happens. Like even when there's these famous trials, people will be like, oh yeah, I know he's guilty, or I know they're not guilty, whatever. Well, the trial hasn't even started yet, so let's just see what evidence is presented, and then we can get to that word, or those two words, exact truth. Because right now you don't know what it is, I don't know what it is. We're going to have to wait to find out, what it is.
It always reminds, a great point. It reminds me, not to make light of any war at all, but it reminds me, I think it might have been when the Western Allies were looking to remove Saddam Hussein, from power. and he had a news, like a government official, like maybe an army official, that was his official media reporter person, sharing updates, obviously to the people on the news channels. And I'll never forget it because it did make me chuckle, and it goes to your point of the exact truth. So he stood there and he's broadcasting in front of the camera, to the people watching, saying that there are no US tanks, or there are no tanks in, I think it was Iraq. I can't recall. My memory's hazy. There are no tanks in the city. And right behind them, tanks started rumbling by as he was broadcasting it from the Allies that had just entered the city. And that will always, always stick with me when, to your point, when it comes to people and propaganda and everything like that. And you have to, if you're doing something like that, you have to have the exact truth, right?
Sure, and then to use your example there, which was a good one, yeah. So truth changes depending on your perspective, and even through the years. So to go to a similar example, before the Iraq War started, the reason for the war, besides replacing Saddam Hussein, was of course there were weapons of mass destruction. Now I know this is somewhat debatable, but it seems to be that nobody ever found them. So therefore, is the truth that they just could never find them, or that they were never there? Not sure about that. That's for political people, but I think that just goes to prove that trying to find truth is extremely difficult. Extremely difficult.
Well, one thing we can agree on when it comes to the exact truth is it's true we've reached question number 5.
Uh-oh.
So we've done well here, Frank. We've got to the end. We're doing good, but they've been really good questions, and this is what I love about this podcast. Like, the questions are always fun and they're always good, and sometimes you'll get complete curveball questions that really does make you think. And so thank you for answering the questions so far. Let's have a look and seeing what the final question is. Okay, this is a really good one to finish this episode off with for the 5 random questions. Question 5, Frank. Describe your life using one word.
Wow. Danny, this is a deep question. My gosh. I can't say the word podcast.
You could, yep. It'd be accurate as well.
You know what? There's a lot of different words or adjectives I could use, but because of what I'm currently involved in now, and maybe this doesn't relate just to me, and I don't want to belabor this point, but I'd use the word courage. And I'm going to relate that to podcasting because I get the opportunity to interact with people like you, other people in independent podcasting who are courageous enough to start this venture. And I feel like it's so amazing that people can bootstrap. Most of these independent podcasts are bootstrapped. And so they don't have the funding that other people have. And so or in a lot of cases, the technical expertise. So, for example, I always recommend to independent podcasters that are starting, I said, go listen to Danny's 1-minute podcast tips. It doesn't take a lot of time. You can listen to them anytime you want, but I'll tell you that it'll help you, get your the technology part of the podcasting squared away. And that's, if anything else, when it comes to that, you need to have the IT part of that first. You need to have good sound design. So, I mean, I know maybe this is a little bit of a cop out, but again, because of what I'm doing now, and I really do love doing that. I can't tell you how much it isn't just a job. I feel like when I listen to a new podcast, and I'll take a second to tell you my process for doing that. So, because every day I get up, I'm an early riser at like 5:30. So I get coffee and then read the news, and then by 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm out the door. And I walk 6 miles a day. And that takes about an hour, over an hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes or something like that. And so those 100 minutes every day this is where I'm listening to either 3 kinds of podcasts. The ones that I love every day that I'll listen to no matter what. I can't miss them. And then the ones that I've discovered that I'm listening to, and the last is the brand new podcast. And I really do try to focus on independent podcasts. And I can't wait to some days to get out there and listen to them. And then that's my process is I'll listen to them sometimes for a couple of days in a row, because I don't want to, again, back to our earlier question, I don't want to make a rash judgment. Gee, I listened to one of your episodes and it wasn't your best. So I'll try to listen to at least 4 or 5 episodes and then come back and then be able to write about it, review it, recommend it to other people. That's a good feeling. And I always talk about how these people are putting themselves out there on doing these podcasts. It's, well, as you know, I mean, it's an amazing venture, but it does take a lot of guts to do that. It really does.
Well, I think the thing is, from a creator point of view, to your point, and obviously for yourself that does the reviews and putting your own reviews and your thoughts out there, you're opening yourself up to the internet. And we all know what the internet can be like. There's great internet, but there's also really bad internet. And you have no control over that whatsoever. You can only create what you can and do it to your liking, and hopefully others will like it, right? But yeah, it's I see your point on the courage when, as you mentioned, because it's nerve-wracking, right? I see you were like you were a speechwriter. I'm sure a lot of people that you wrote speeches for often felt nervous before they got up on stage, because they're putting themselves out there, and they're putting themselves out open to feedback that could go either way, right?
No, absolutely. And when you're doing a speech for somebody, you always have to remember, when I wrote speeches for a lot of executives, even the CEO of our company, I'm writing the words and helping them craft that, but ultimately they're the ones out there on the stage. So when you're the speechwriter, no one criticizes you. They just criticize the person giving the speech. So I basically have the easiest job in the world. And that, that's the tough part of the podcaster is, even if you're in a network supported environment where you have, say, Spotify's hiring all these people and you have this whole team of people, which is great. Still, the bottom line is, if your name's on the podcast, it's all about you. No one's going to write a review and say, hey, by the way, I don't know about the sound designer and the intro music. I'm not sure they did a really good job. Most of it's going to be about the podcaster themselves. So, yeah, I mean, you're hanging out there as the podcaster.
Well, that's it. I mean, thankfully, the show is new, so it's only had a couple of reviews anyway. So I'm wary of what reviews might come in as, this goes into 6 months, a year or whatever. I know friends of mine that are podcasters, they've got horrible reviews, and it kicks you back a bit, right? It kicks them back a bit. But like you say, you've got to put that aside and just, keep enjoying doing what you're doing. And if it's valid, then take that feedback and work on it, to improve the content quality, etc. If it's not valid, ignore it, let them go, bump up someone else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, back to your specific podcast, 5 Random Questions. One of the things I really like about it is sometimes I'll go out and do some searches on the number of podcasts in a different genre. So I wrote an article about this saying that, and again, this is an absolute, I think the people at Sounds Profitable collect a lot more solid data than I have. And the easiest format for people to do in a podcast is an interview podcast. So there's not a lot of cost. I'm not a huge true crime fan. I do like some of their podcasts, but they cost a lot of money because you have to do a lot of research. There's a lot of time involved. There's a lot of people involved. When you're doing an interview podcast, it's the host and a guest or guests. Sometimes you are prepared, sometimes you're not. It all sort of depends on the show. But what I like different about your show, and that's one of the things I like about podcasting, I think is so inventive, is that it always takes a genre that you think, okay, well, this is it. This is traditional interview podcast, and tweaks it just a little bit to make it so much more interesting. And that's the neat part about this, is that if you just asked me 5 questions that you had prepared, and okay, that would still be good. But what makes this so exciting is that neither one of us know. And for anybody listening, by the way, as I'm part of this process, and I've listened to a couple of the shows already on this, it really is totally random. I mean, totally random. So, it's all about extemporizing, and that's difficult. So, love this show. I love the courage that comes from people like you hosting the show, but also for the guests I've heard so far on the show. So, yeah, so excellent.
Well, I appreciate that, mate. And I think you'll really enjoy next week's episode. I think it's next week or the week after. Katie Law, who's a Canadian podcaster, she does Pod the North. Yeah.
Yeah.
She came on and she had some real interesting questions. And then who does the Verbal Diorama podcast, she will also be on, I think, at the end of August. And she got a good few deep questions. We went really deep with which was unexpected. And makes for an interesting. So I think you'll look out for them. But I appreciate that as well. Like your ongoing support as always.
Well, I'm excited about the M because Verbal Diorama is exactly one of those podcasts that I found a few months ago. I was out looking for a good independent like movie review podcast, and I came across our podcast. And Verbal Diorama doesn't yell as a title. This is a film review, and it's not a review so much as it's a explanation of everything happened in making the movie. But it really is a fabulous podcast. I mean, she's done some absolute great shows. She did She did Cloverfield recently, which was really good. Yeah, she's actually terrific. And when I went back and forth with her, one of the reasons I found it so astounding that in the UK, they have an independent podcast award, and she's part of that whole process. And we don't really have that here. And so that's why I was thinking, I'm not sure. Katie probably told you if Canada has an independent podcast report. The States doesn't. So that's something that we need.
Yeah, you've got the Canadian Podcast Awards, but I feel that mixes, because I know CBC, which is a big news organisation in Canada, they were involved as a submission as well. So they were up alongside indie podcasters. So there's Canadian Podcast Awards, but I don't think there's a specific indie one. So that'd be nice to see. So maybe that's something that needs to be led on for sure.
Yeah, well, that's great that you got two fabulous people coming up. So that's I can't wait to hear them. So great.
No, for sure. And speaking of courage, you've had the courage, you've got through the 5 random questions of this week's episode. In 100% fairness to every guest, it's now your turn to throw a random question back at me and take the heat off you.
Okay, this is great. All right, so I was thinking about my question. Now, we already, for the listeners that don't know, Danny's had some water problems in his basement that are somewhat considerable. But I had a more philosophical question. So I know that you've been in Canada for, since 2006?
Six, yeah.
6, so almost 20 years. What, in your mind, what's the difference between Canadians and Americans? And I guess I would mean in 2 ways, outlook and behavior.
Interesting. So I know, funnily enough, when Canadians go abroad, they always make sure that they've got the Canadian flag on their backpack, like a little sticker or something, or a patch or something. Because a lot of Canadians don't like getting mistaken for Americans. But I feel that, and let me preface that, or let me clarify that, or quantify that.
That's true. That's true, by the way.
Well, I feel that's understandable from one point of view, but it goes back to the exact truth and the 2 truths, or the 2 points of view, right? There's good actors and bad actors in every country. There's good people, bad people, and there's like good examples and bad examples of every country. And I feel often the US gets a bad rap because we see a lot of the bad examples because that's what the media likes to show. And they don't show the good work. There's a guy in the US, he's like, he goes across every state and he mows lawns in every state for people that need their lawn mowed. So it could be vets, it could be people with disabilities, it could be people that just can't do their lawns. But what he does is he invites kids to join this challenge. So like the 50-yard challenge, I think it's called. And I'll leave a link in the show notes. Amazing guy, amazing initiative. So kids will join the 50-yard challenge and they'll go around their neighborhoods mowing the lawns for people that need the lawns mowed for help. And like I say, it's amazing. You don't get to hear that, right? You don't get that focus on there. So I just wanted to quantify that when I mentioned the whole Canadian flag on the backpack or the case or whatever. I feel the main difference is, and I think this again boils down to cities and maybe states or whatever. I feel a lot of Canadians will be more approachable to talking with a stranger, as opposed to Americans. Having said that, when in New York, I found a lot of New Yorkers would love to chat when they hear your accent, or they hear you're in a restaurant. Very open, very friendly. I found that in Denver. I found a lot of people in Denver really friendly, really open when I was there last year. So I feel maybe by stereotypical default, Canadians are seen as friendly and approachable, whereas maybe Americans are seen as not standoffish. That's a British thing. I feel it's a very definite British thing, but maybe less inclined to open a conversation with a stranger or want to continue a conversation. But I feel, like I say, I have to do the yin and yang with that, right? It depends where and how. Culturally, I feel there's maybe more willingness on a Canadian to travel to different countries and expand their worldview, as opposed to where I feel maybe a lot of Americans, whether it's like financial, whether it's just like because America's such a big country, there's a lot to do in America anyway, are less likely to travel outside America when it comes to learning about other cultures, etc. I don't know if you'd agree with that, if that's something you'd seen or not.
Yeah, no, I do agree with that. Actually, we do a lot of cruising and travel overseas. And yeah, I agree with that. Matter of fact, some of our best cruises have been, we were on board once with the whole cruise is basically a few Americans, Canadians, and people from the UK. We had just a blast with all of them.
No, and then that's it, right? I mean, the stereotypical would say, well, we'd have a great time with the Canadians, not so much a good time with Americans, or not such a good time with the Brits, because the Brits are stiff upper lip and they don't want to talk to anybody that's not, not British. So yeah, it's a great question, and I think, like I say, it's got a lot of context. Going back to your initial answer and one of the early questions about context, right? It needs a lot of that, I feel.
Oh yeah, and that's you mentioned this about the British, is that you have to be careful about cultural stereotypes. I mean, we met some British folks on one of our cruises that they were so friendly. I even said to the one couple, I'm like, "You're so friendly, you're American," because sometimes Americans are accused of being sort of over friendly too soon, like they kind of swarm at you. And he was like, yeah, we've been told that, and we find that as a compliment. So yeah, the one thing I will say is that we've met a lot of Canadians, and the one thing I would say is that I do feel bad, because it seems like that in North America everything ends up being dominated by what's going on in the States rather than Canada. And so, for example, you mentioned Katie. Now I read her Substack all the time about Canadian podcasts, and I wrote a couple of articles that said, hey, by the way, folks in the U.S., I don't know if you know this before, but the Canadians and the Australians are kicking our butt when it comes to percentage of podcasting listening. So we got to get going on that. There's a lot going in both countries, especially in Canada. I know a lot of people in the States may not know that, but there's a lot going there.
Yeah, and it's good to see. But there's a great podcast event in Calgary next month, and that's really highlighting a lot of Canadian stuff. So yeah, it's good to see Canada sort of catching up, and as you mentioned, Australia catching up on the US, when it comes to podcasting and podcast listenership.
Well, thanks for the tip on Calgary. Actually, I'm going to be in Calgary September 16th. Yeah, we're going to Banff and Lake Louise. So if they have the podcast thing, I have to try to attend.
It's run about that time, actually, but around about the third week, I think. But yeah, it looks like a Pod Summit. I think it's Pod Summit, actually. There you go. I think it's Pod Summit in Calgary, September 19, 20. But yeah, so that looks a good event. So Frank, this has been an absolute delight. We had a good chat pre-recording. We've had an awesome chat during recording. It's been a delight. For people that want to catch up with you, whether it's online, but not Facebook, want to check out Earworthy and all the other stuff that you're doing, and check out the awesome recommendations you do, where can people best find you and connect with you?
So, Danny, a couple places. One is you can go to my Substack, which is podalization.substack.com, PODALIZATION, .substack.com, or you can go to Medium and just search for Earworthy. You can find me there. You can find me on Blogger at podcastreports.blogspot.com as well. So in a couple different places, and I'm on social media, except, of course, for Facebook. Sorry about that. Yeah, and I always love Always love to get feedback from people about, hey, listen to this podcast. You'll love it. And most times when I get that information, almost all the time, they're right. And it gives me another opportunity to write a review on a great podcast.
And I will be sure to leave all these links in the show notes. And I highly recommend checking them out because Frank does a great job at really going in depth with every review and recommendation. So highly recommend checking out. I'll be sure to leave the links in the show notes. So make sure you check them out to link through to. So again, Frank, I appreciate your time today.
Oh, Danny, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to 5 Random Questions. If you enjoyed this week's episode, be sure to follow for free on the app you're currently listening on or online at 5randomquestions.com. And if you feel like leaving a review, well, that would make me happier than that time I found out I could replace blogging with podcasting because I could never be as talented or as fruitful as Frank when it comes to typing speed and output. Seriously, if you want to leave a review, you can do that at 5randomquestions.com/review. It would make my day. Until the next time, keep asking those questions.